Hello class, my name is Fernando Rodriguez, and the contemporary police issue, really a reoccurring one that I don't know if it'll ever go away, is civil unrest. The way civil unrest starts is particularly nowadays, is through televised incidents that happen where conduct of officers is in question. Usually it is officers against a minority, such as African Americans. Incidents such as Freddie Gray, which we'll get in a minute. But usually, after an incident is called to the public's attention, the public then judges the incident and acts as judge, jury, and in a way executioner, because they protest in order to get either the termination, prosecution, or resignations of the individuals that are involved, because they don't like they're either for the current way that a case is going, and they just want to make it known to the public eye, or they're against it. And that's when, either way, both can go violent, because both people are usually in the area, and things like that get violent pretty fast. This has been more of a sudden trend, or more publicized in the past 20 years. We'll talk about how social media affects that later on. In this case, I'm going to bring to light, the 2015 case of Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray was a 25-year-old black man who, on April 12th of 2015, made eye contact with a Baltimore police officer, and for unknown reasons ran away from him. The officer chased Gray, arrested him, and put him in a paddy wagon. Civilian video showed Gray being dragged into a vehicle. His body seemed limp. When he was taken to the hospital hours later, they realized he had a severed spine, an injury that was caused by officers, or allegedly. The injury killed him on April 19th. So, obviously the public was outraged when he died. After Gray's death, the protests escalated and turned violent. And in order to fully understand how civil unrest and protests and how they happen, because civil unrest escalates into protests because of how people want to get their point across. They don't agree with certain things. The public doesn't agree with certain things, or maybe that they do. But we need to look at it from a historical standpoint, because this is not anything new. This has been happening for years. I mean, you could say that since the invention of, or since the beginning of policing and law enforcement agencies, because whatever decision is made, you can't please everybody. So someone's going to be not okay with what's going on, or whatever verdict comes out from cases or incidents like this. So we will take a look at Detroit in 1943. In 1943, there was already racial tensions that had been simmering between blacks and whites in Detroit for the first half of that year. And by June, they reached a boiling point when a white sailor's girlfriend said a black man had insulted her. Rumors of perceived or real injustices began to flow, and before long, black and white residents took to the streets against one another. When it was all said and done, 2 days later, 34 people were dead, 433 were wounded, and $2 million worth of property damage had been destroyed. So this is a case, more than 60 years old at this point. More than 70 years old. That same year, in Harlem, New York, a black soldier named Robert Bandy approached a white police officer who had arrested a black woman on charges of disorderly conduct. The officer eventually shot Bandy, after which a crowd of 3,000 people gathered around as he escorted Bandy to the hospital for treatment. The crowd was angry, and their anger spread across Harlem, New York for 2 days. It led to 6 deaths and 600 arrests. In 1964, in Harlem, New York as well, more than 20 years later, Harlem erupted again when James Powell, a black man, was shot and killed by New York Police Lieutenant Thomas Gilligan. During the struggle, Gilligan also wounded a 15-year-old black teenager in front of his friends and other witnesses. Hundreds of people gathered to get answers for Lieutenant Thomas Gilligan's actions, and it sparked a 6-night violent protest in both Harlem and Brooklyn neighborhoods. At the end of it all, 1 person died, 118 were injured, and another 465 were arrested. In Philadelphia, in 1964, a black woman named Odessa Bradford got into an argument with 2 police officers after her car had just stalled on the North Philadelphia city street. Officers tried to physically remove her from the vehicle. That's when a witness tried to come to her aid, but both were arrested, leading to anger and confusion amongst residents. They took to the streets to vent that anger again, and in the end, 774 people were arrested and hundreds of stores were destroyed. Thankfully, no one died in this incident. But as you can see, it's a reoccurring theme that, this isn't anything new. You can argue that social media has expanded this, nationally a little bit more, and it's been brought to light, which we'll see has, benefits, but also, bad outcomes from it. Then we go into more recent civil unrest issues. In 1961, in New York again, in Brooklyn, New York, a 17-year-old named Gavin Cato was struck and killed in the Crown Heights neighborhood by a car that was part of a motorcade for a Hasidic Jew leader. So a volunteer ambulance arrived to care for the Jewish leader and his people, but no ambulance came right away for the black resident who was hurt, which was Gavin Cato. He later died and was left at the scene, before the ambulance could even arrive. 3 days of rioting followed, resulting in 38 civilian injuries, 152 officer injuries, and 129 arrests. So in this case, there was a lot of officer injuries, leading to one of the solutions we'll talk about later, which is how to deal with protests from an officer standpoint. In 2009, in Oakland, California, on New Year's Day specifically, Oscar Grant, an unarmed 22-year-old black man, was shot and killed by transit officer Johannes Mesereau. The video went public, inciting, simmering outrage at law enforcement's treatment of black residents. The officer was later found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and given a 2-year prison sentence. Residents upset at what they saw as a light penalty took to the streets. 100 people were arrested. So you can see that in this case specifically, they found the officer guilty, which should have, appeased the public eye, but they was apparently not seen fit enough for the crime. I don't know the full details, I'm just kind of summarizing it, or I won't get into full details, but either way, they took to the streets because of their civil unrest. In 2014, one of the other well-known cases recently is in Ferguson, Missouri, about a kid named Michael Brown. He was an unarmed 18-year-old who was shot and killed after an interaction with police officer Darren Wilson. Photos of Brown's lifeless body soon flooded social media. Crowds gathered in Ferguson, followed by angry clashes with riot cops in the streets. Months later, when a grand jury failed to indict Wilson on criminal charges, protesters clashed with police again. A Department of Justice report later documented systemic racial discrimination in the case. So these are some of the many cases that have been going on, for years now. It's not anything new. They've just, if anything, they've been shed more light towards. And once you know something from the standpoint from the public, that's when you start making your own assumptions. You become the judge and jury in this case. So a possible solution for the act of protesting itself, or the act of civil unrest turning into protests, is national organized groups providing support for local law enforcement. Training would be the key for line officers when it comes to crowd controls. Also, a designated official should be appointed in every department in order to ensure that action plans such as these are in place and troops are trained in methods to disperse the civil unrest and protesters. Also, it's also important to maintain positive relationships with the community and civic leaders in the community. I believe that the relationship with the community and all the leaders in the community, that's very important for any solution when it comes to civil unrest. Try to appease the public. They have to make sure that that justice is served, and because you can't please everybody, but to make the public understand why they make the decisions that the judges make, and in cases that involve rioting and all that stuff. Another possible solution for civil unrest is police officer scrutiny, or on the topic of police officer scrutiny, because a lot of these issues, as we saw, they involve police officers and how they carried their duties on the job. There's a growing desire to scrutinize officers due to societal will nowadays, particularly when actions by officers lead to injury or death. In terms of law, it has been unclear if in the past there has been this many challenges to the effectiveness and persecution of officers. However, this scrutiny has become the new status quo. A possible solution that has been presented or proposed is to raise the level of awareness and professional conduct within organizations. It relies on officers identifying areas where their professional actions and conduct can be scrutinized. In this case, the most highly relevant areas would be armed confrontations and vehicle collisions. Another possible solution, but it also has its drawbacks, is they're called body-worn cameras, or BWC. They're the new body cams that officers are being trained to use nowadays. It's a highly debated by the side of officers mostly, because it would prove to defend officers and the person being detained or subdued. However, this new innovation in the departments, would take time to get used to, and the issues that can arise are usually from older officers who do not like their discretion being tampered with, and adapting to technology is something that would be very hard for older generation individuals. Also, officers in the force who have not been trained to use body cams would have to be retrained on using this new technology, and would cost the department funds in order to achieve to a certain level the need that they have for police transparency. Another potential solution to civil unrest is federal agency oversight. So this is where the whole federal versus state can also clash. It's one of the dilemmas, but the solution is that the Justice Department and other federal agencies would intervene on local police matters. This is likely a result of political pressure from DC, history of failures in various police and sheriff's departments across the United States, and civil unrest within the community which demand change. They want for departments to be responsible and answer to a higher authority in order to improve. Much can be learned as well from perusing existing published reports, consent decrees, monitors, or other documents where federal agencies have been involved in. Local departments would be then in a state of unrest, though, because they would have to answer to another power. Interdepartment relations would go down. It would require a total restructuring of local departments at a national level, which would take a lot of time, money, and attention away from enforcing the law, which is a key issue. In conclusion, some would say that police cases are being tried in court of public opinion on the internet. The favorite media buzz phrase is "officers caught on video," which immediately prescribes that an officer was doing something wrong. Even plaintiff attorneys are utilizing social media to highly publicize their cases in order to get the people behind their side. In some cases, law enforcement has taken to social media as well as a means to defend actions of officers under scrutiny. This can be a double-edged sword. Here again, consistency is essential. If you comment on one case and not another, it suggests that there may be something nefarious, you have something nefarious to hide. So, if you embrace social media, you should not be overzealous in its use. Develop a sound and reasonable social media policy and stick to it regardless. History has shown that this issue of civil unrest has been prevalent since the inception of law enforcement. Solutions have been suggested. Solutions require change. With change can come problems in any situation. These are two of my sources that I use to compile the information that has been presented to you. If you have any questions, feel free to post them here in the discussion. Again, thank you, Dr. Macon, for letting us partake in this discussion in this course. And I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.